Welcome, dear viewers. Today's episode is called, Why Have Arabs and Jews Been in Conflict for 3,000 Years? The truth will shock you. The question itself is wrong. Arabs and Jews have not been fighting for 3,000 years. This is one of the most persistent and dangerous myths in modern history. The Arab-Israeli conflict began in the 20th century, evolving from earlier intercommunal violence in mandatory Palestine. Not 3 millennia ago, not even 3 centuries ago. The truth is far more complex, far stranger, and completely different from what most people believe. So let's begin. For over 1,000 years, Jews and Arabs lived side by side. Jewish presence in the Arabian Peninsula dates back to the 6th century before the Common Era. By the time Muhammad established Islam in the 7th century of the Common Era, Jewish and Arab tribes had been interacting for hundreds of years in the Hijaz region in cities such as Mecca and Medina. They traded together. They fought together. They married into each other's families. Most Arab clans and tribes had Jewish members representing all facets of Arabian life, from urban craftsmen to desert nomads. The relationship was not paradise, but it was not perpetual war. Under Islamic rule, Jews, along with Christians and certain other pre-Islamic monotheistic religious groups, were considered people of the book and given the status of Dhimmi, protected people. They paid a special tax called jizya. In return for payment of the jizya, non-Muslim populations were granted protection of life and property and the right to practice their religion. The system was not equal. Jews could not testify against Muslims in court with full weight. They could not build houses higher than Muslim neighbors in some regions. They wore distinctive clothing to mark their status. But here is what nobody tells you. For medieval Jews, this was often better than life in Christian Europe. Despite the humiliating connotations and the financial burden, the jizya paid by Jews under Islamic rule provided a surer guarantee of protection from non-Jewish hostility than that possessed by Jews in the Latin West. In Europe, Jews faced massacres during the Crusades, expulsions from England in 1290, from France in 1394, from Spain in 1492. In Muslim lands, especially during certain periods, Jews prospered. The period that constitutes the pinnacle of Jewish-Arab relations was the 8th to 12th centuries, and the place, Al-Andalus, located in modern-day Spain. This was the so-called Golden Age. Jewish poets such as Shlomo ibn Gabirol and Yehuda Halevi were guests of honor in Christian and Muslim courts alike. Jewish scholars, physicians, and diplomats served in the highest positions of Muslim kingdoms. The great Jewish philosopher Moses Maimonides, known as the Rambam, lived and worked in Muslim Egypt in the 12th century, serving as personal physician to the Sultan. This golden age was real, but it was also mythologized. Modern historians discovered the reality was more complicated. Jews held high positions, yes, but they did so under constant awareness of their subordinate status. The system could protect them. It could also crush them overnight if a ruler changed policy. There were notable persecutions of Jews, such as the 1033 Fez massacre, 1066 Granada massacre, and 1834 looting of Safed. Protection was conditional. It depended on the ruler, the region, the political situation. But compared to what came later, compared to the total rupture of the 20th century, the medieval period seems almost tranquil. So what changed? Why did a relationship that lasted over a millennium collapse so completely in less than 100 years? The answer lies not 3,000 years in the past, but in the political earthquake that hit the Middle East in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the collision of two nationalisms born in Europe. The first nationalism was Zionism. Widespread anti-Semitism and persecution of Jewish communities in Europe in the late 19th and early 20th centuries served as a major catalyst for the Zionist movement. Jews in Russia faced pogroms, organized massacres. Jews in France witnessed the Dreyfus Affair, where a Jewish army officer was falsely convicted of treason in 1894, exposing deep anti-Semitism even in supposedly enlightened Western Europe. An Austrian Jewish journalist named Theodor Herzl witnessed the Dreyfus trial. He concluded that Jews would never be safe in Europe. They needed their own state. The first Zionist Congress was held in 1897 in Basel, Switzerland, where Herzl and other prominent figures in the Zionist movement discussed and debated their vision for the establishment of a Jewish state. Their chosen location? Palestine, the land Jews called Israel, the land of their ancestors, the land they had prayed toward for 2,000 years since the Roman destruction of Jerusalem in 70 Common Era. But Palestine was not empty. According to demographer Justin McCarthy, who estimated from Ottoman census data, the population of Palestine in 1882 to 1883 was about 468,000, consisting of 408,000 Arabs and others. These people had lived there for centuries. They were peasant farmers, urban merchants, landowners. They were not particularly nationalist in 1897. Most identified primarily with their village, their clan, their religion. The concept of Palestinian as a national identity barely existed yet. But it would emerge, and that emergence would create the second nationalism. Arab nationalism grew from the same soil as Zionism, the collapse of the old imperial order. Arab nationalism and Zionism began in Europe. Arabs studying in Paris and other European capitals absorbed ideas about national self-determination, ethnic homelands, the rights of peoples. Approaching the end of their empire, the Ottomans began to assert the primacy of Turks within the empire, while discriminating against Arabs. This discrimination fueled Arab desire for independence. During World War I, both movements saw opportunity. Arabs rebelled against the Ottoman Empire with British support, hoping for independence. Jews supported Britain too, hoping for a homeland in Palestine. The Balfour Declaration, signed in 1917, stated that the government of Great Britain supported the establishment of a Jewish national home in Palestine. This was a vague promise. Britain simultaneously promised Arabs their own kingdoms. The contradictions were deliberate. Britain wanted both groups' support against the Ottomans. After World War I, the contradictions exploded. The Ottoman Empire was carved up. The 1920 San Remo Conference largely endorsed the 1916 Anglo-French Sykes-Picot Agreement, allocating to Britain the area of present-day Jordan, the area between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, and Iraq, while France received Syria and Lebanon. The Arabs felt betrayed. They'd fought alongside Britain. They expected independence. Instead, they got British and French colonial rule under the League of Nations mandate system. Palestine became a British mandate, and here the two nationalisms, Jewish and Arab, collided directly. Tensions between the Zionist movements and the Arab residents of Palestine started to emerge after the 1880s, when immigration of European Jews to Palestine increased. But under British rule, these tensions became violent. Jewish immigration accelerated. Land purchases by Jewish organizations increased. Arab farmers who had worked land for generations suddenly found themselves displaced. Not always legally dispossessed, Much land was acquired from Ottoman and individual Arab landholders, known as effendis, absentee landlords who sold to the highest bidder. But the result was the same. Arab peasants lost access to land their families had farmed for centuries. The 1929 Hebron massacre marked a turning point. Arab mobs attacked the ancient Jewish community of Hebron, which had lived there continuously since biblical times. 67 Jews perished. The survivors fled. Then came the 1936 to 1939 Arab Revolt in Palestine. Arabs attacked British authorities and Jewish settlements, demanding an end to Jewish immigration and land sales. The British crushed the revolt brutally, killing thousands of Arabs. Meanwhile, events in Europe were making the situation impossible to resolve peacefully. Adolf Hitler came to power in Germany in 1933. Jewish desperation to escape Europe intensified. Pogroms in Russia and Ukraine, as well as Adolf Hitler's rise to power in Germany, created a new urgency in the Zionist movement to create a Jewish state. But the British, trying to appease Arab anger and protect oil interests, issued the White Paper in 1939, a British policy statement that limited Jewish immigration and land acquisition in Palestine. This had a significant impact by restricting the ability of Jews to escape the Holocaust and return to their ancestral homeland. Think about the timing. 1939, the same year World War II began. The same year the Holocaust started. Britain closed the gates to Palestine precisely when European Jews needed escape most desperately. Ships carrying Jewish refugees were turned away. Some sank. Others were forced back to Europe where passengers faced extermination. This catastrophic policy radicalized both sides. Jewish militant groups like the Irgun and Lehi began attacking British targets, declaring Britain an enemy of the Jewish people. Arabs saw Jewish desperation and radicalization as proof that a Jewish state would mean their own displacement. After World War II, after the full horror of the Holocaust emerged, 6 million Jews exterminated in gas chambers and concentration camps, the world's sympathy shifted toward Jewish survivors. The United Nations proposed a solution: partition Palestine into 2 states, one Jewish and one Arab. United Nations Resolution 181 recommended the partition of Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states, with Jerusalem under international administration. Jewish leaders accepted the plan, while Arab states and Palestinians rejected it. On May 14, 1948, David Ben-Gurion declared the establishment of the State of Israel. The next day, Arab forces from Egypt, Transjordan, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon occupied the areas in southern and eastern Palestine not apportioned to the Jews by the United Nations partition, and then captured East Jerusalem. The Arab forces expected quick victory. They vastly outnumbered the Jewish militias, but they were poorly coordinated. 5 separate armies with 5 separate commands, no unified strategy, competing for territory and glory. Israel won. Though the United Nations brokered 2 ceasefires during the conflict, fighting continued into 1949. Under separate agreements between Israel and the neighboring states of Egypt, Lebanon, Transjordan, and Syria, these bordering nations agreed to formal armistice lines. Israel gained some territory formally granted to Palestinian Arabs under the United Nations resolution in 1947. Egypt and Jordan retained control over the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, respectively. For Israelis, 1948 was independence. For Palestinians, it was the Nakba, the catastrophe. Before and during this conflict, 713,000 Palestinian Arabs fled, becoming Palestinian refugees. The exact reasons remain disputed. Historian Benny Morris claimed that the decisive cause of Palestinian departure was predominantly Jewish forces' actions, including physical expulsions and military assaults. In part due to a promise from Arab leaders that they would be able to return when the war had been won, and in part due to attacks on Palestinian villages and towns by Israeli forces and Jewish militants, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians left their homes. They never returned. Israel refused to allow their return, arguing that allowing back hostile populations would threaten the new state's security. Simultaneously, a mirror exodus occurred in the opposite direction. Over the course of 20 years, some 850,000 Jews from Arab countries immigrated. Jews were deprived of citizenship in Libya. Their property was seized in Iraq. Egypt expelled most of its foreign community, including Jews, after the Suez Crisis in 1956, and Algeria deprived its French citizens, including Jews, of citizenship upon its independence in 1962. In some cases, Jews fled persecution and violence. Christian and Jewish minorities in areas like Aleppo, Syria, and British-controlled Aden were hit particularly hard, with hundreds affected. In other cases, Zionist organizations actively encouraged and assisted immigration to Israel, seeing the ingathering of Jewish communities as fulfilling Zionism's mission. The result was a complete population exchange. Jewish communities that had lived in Baghdad, Cairo, Damascus, and Casablanca for over 1,000 years vanished within 2 decades. Palestinian villages that had existed for centuries in what became Israel were erased. Ancient cosmopolitan cities became ethnically homogeneous. By the end of the 20th century, only around 27,000 Jews remained in Arab and Muslim countries. 1948 was just the beginning. Israel fought conflicts with Arab forces in 1948 to 1949, 1956, 1967, 1973, 1982, 2006, and 2023 to present. Each war hardened positions. Each war created new refugees, new grievances, new cycles of violence. The 1967 Six-Day War was particularly transformative. It lasted from June 5th to June 10th, 1967, and resulted in an overwhelming victory for Israel, the capture of large swaths of territory from the surrounding Arab states, creating an important defensive buffer for Israel, and the reunification of Jerusalem, which came under Jewish sovereignty for the first time in nearly 2,000 years. But it also meant Israel now controlled the West Bank and Gaza Strip, populated by over 1 million Palestinians. The occupation continues today, nearly 60 years later. We've been told Arabs and Jews are ancient enemies, blood enemies, that their conflict is biblical, eternal, unsolvable. This narrative serves those who benefit from continued conflict. It erases the long history of coexistence. It makes the current situation seem inevitable, natural, unchangeable. But the evidence tells a different story. The Arab-Israeli conflict is in origin a battle pitting a coherent national idea represented by political Zionism against an ethno-religious ideology, Arab and Islamic, formed in reaction to Zionist encroachments on what were deemed Arab and Islamic lands. It is not 3,000 years old. It is barely more than 100 years old. It emerged from specific historical circumstances: the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, European colonialism, the rise of nationalism, the Holocaust, the failure of British policy, the competition for land and resources in a small territory. Understanding this matters, because if the conflict is ancient and inevitable, then there is no hope for resolution. But if it is modern and contingent, born from specific choices and policies, then different choices and policies could lead to different outcomes. Consider the counterfactuals. What if Britain had honored its promises to Arabs after World War I? What if the White Paper had not closed Palestine to Jewish refugees in 1939? What if the United Nations Partition Plan had been accepted by both sides? What if the 1948 refugee crisis had been resolved through negotiated return or compensation? Each moment presented choices. Different choices would have led to different realities. Here is the uncomfortable truth. For most of history, Jews and Arabs were not enemies. They were neighbors, sometimes hostile, sometimes cooperative, usually somewhere in between. When asked about Jewish-Arab relations, a grandmother who grew up in Baghdad describes the charming city with the river running through it, her family visiting the riverbanks on weekends, burying watermelons deep in the sand to cool them during hot summer days, her father's shoe store, and coexistence with Arab neighbors. That coexistence was shattered in the Farhud pogrom that affected nearly 200 Iraqi Jews during the Shavuot holiday of 1941. But it existed for centuries before. The transformation of Jews from dhimmis, protected but subordinate minorities, into a sovereign military power threatened established social hierarchies in the Arab and Muslim world. This is the story of a dhimmi people, a subject people, who ought to have stayed within their bounds, but who shook off the yoke of servitude, emerging triumphant as master of a sovereign non-Muslim state in the abode of Islam. For many Arabs and Muslims, this reversal was intolerable. It violated the expected order. Jews were supposed to be subordinate. Now they commanded armies, controlled territory, defeated Arab nations in battle. This religious and psychological dimension deepens the conflict beyond mere territorial dispute. Arabs viewed 1948 as the epitome of injustice, the dispossession of Arabs and their exile, a Nakba, as the events are described in Arabic. Conversely, Israel viewed 1948 as the apotheosis of justice, the summum bonum of redemption, the answer to 2,000 years of dispossession, exile, prayers, yearnings, and dreams of restitution to the Jews' ancestral homeland. Two completely incompatible narratives, two absolute claims to justice, no common ground. Yet even within this seemingly intractable situation, examples of different possibilities exist. In recent years, there have been some positive developments and opportunities for dialogue and reconciliation, such as the Abraham Accords, which normalized relations between Israel and several Arab countries, such as the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan. These agreements show that Arab-Israeli relations can change. They are not fixed by ancient hatreds. They respond to contemporary interests, security concerns, economic opportunities. As of today, most of the immediate Jewish-Arab relations take place in the State of Israel, where out of nearly 10 million citizens, 73% are Jews and 21% are Christian, Muslim, or Druze Arabs. Jews and Arabs work and live together, meeting at the supermarket, the university classrooms, the workplace, or at the beach. Living together in Israel is not without ethnic, cultural, political, and religious tension. Indeed, it is far from a true paradise or golden age. However, as far as life within Israel is concerned, it is possible to talk about a daily, albeit fragile, Jewish-Arab coexistence. This daily coexistence inside Israel contrasts sharply with the situation in the Palestinian territories. The West Bank remains under Israeli military occupation. Gaza, controlled by Hamas since 2007, has been under blockade by Israel and Egypt. On October 7, 2023, Hamas led an assault against Israel, taking over 240 hostages. The attack occurred under the shadow of the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War. The subsequent conflict has intensified divisions, hardened positions, and made peace seem more distant than ever. But the conflict is not 3,000 years old. It did not begin with Abraham, with Moses, with Muhammad. It began when modern nationalisms collided in a small land that both peoples considered sacred. It began when European powers drew borders and made contradictory promises. It began when refugees, Jewish refugees from Europe, Palestinian refugees from war, were used as political pawns rather than treated as human beings deserving of safety and dignity. The question, why have Arabs and Jews been in conflict for 3,000 years, is designed to make the conflict seem inevitable, ancient, unsolvable. But that question is based on a lie. The real question is, why did a relationship that lasted over a millennium, sometimes peaceful, sometimes tense, but rarely characterized by total war, collapse so completely in the 20th century? And the answer to that question is not found in the distant past. It is found in colonialism, nationalism, failed diplomacy, and the catastrophic decisions of the 1920s through 1940s. History is not destiny. The conflict is modern, not ancient. It was made by human choices. And what humans make, humans can unmake. That is the truth they do not want you to know.
Come look here. I have the best prices.